warm welcome to Truth and Reconciliation Week 2026. When we speak of the partition of nations, we often think of borders drawn on maps. But the deepest partitions are often carried in families, in memories, silences, and stories passed from one generation to the next. So I'm your host, and I'm Nilima Bhatt, and today we turn to the partition of Bengal, not through politics or history books, but through the lived experiences of two families whose stories continue to echo across generations. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Neela Bhattacharya Saxena, author, mythologist, and scholar, whose work bridges spirituality, storytelling, and women's wisdom, and Surya Sarthi Roy, historian, heritage researcher, and storyteller dedicated to preserving the living memory of India's past. Welcome, Neela and Surya.
Namaste.
Thank you. Thank you so
So,
much.
You're so welcome. I'd like us to begin by going into the story you inherited. Okay, so I'd like to begin with the stories themselves. Could each of you take us back into your family's experience of the partition of Bengal? Tell us the story as it was told to you. Who were the people involved? What happened? What moments have stayed with you most vividly? Please do also share some history for our listeners who may not be aware of the partition of Bengal. So maybe Surya ji, you start by, since you're the historian.
Okay. So thank you and warm welcome to all the participants who have registered for this event. Whenever we speak of the partition of Bengal or the independence of India, it doesn't bring in a good memory. And I have spoken about this subject in some other forums as well, but not so vividly. And possibly this is the first time that I am talking about it from a family history perspective, publicly, in a public domain. So, yes, and as you all know, that the two states of Punjab and Bengal were the two states which broke up. And typically today, the history that is available to us makes us believe that the partition that happened for Bengal and the migrants who came in from East Bengal or Bangladesh that we know of today migrated to West Bengal. But no, that's not the complete story. People from East Bengal had moved majorly to West Bengal, of course, but they also moved to Assam, to Tripura, the erstwhile Tipera, that's how the British used to call them, to places like Shillong in Meghalaya. So, a large section of it I came to know very recently through one of my friends who is actually researching on that. A large section of Dalit Bengalis also, SCST or whatever you want to term them, had moved to remote corners of Orissa and Chhattisgarh. And this came as a complete surprise to me. I mean, these generations are their, grandchildren even today survive with those memories, just like us, in areas like Malkangiri, Koraput, uh, to some extent in Kalahandi, or Bastar, or Dantewada, or Sirpur side, Bilaspur, in Chhattisgarh, these places. So that's one part of it. I wanted to share this so that people have a fair bit of understanding that actually on ground, what happened. And today, when we talk on the history of the partition, people are not aware, largely, even academicians are not aware, largely, that this migration did happen into these parts of, into these states of India, actually. The other part, which is not so widely discussed, is the partition of Burma. There was a large chunk of Bengalis who were holding the Burmese economy together in terms of shipping, timber industry, cultivation, agriculture, everywhere they were there, including my great grandfather. So once the partition of Burma happened, a large section of Bengalis came in from Rangoon, Mandalay, these kind of places. So that is also not recorded. Possibly someday, if I get a chance, I will try to put my hands into that partition of Burma and how the Bengali Hindus were impacted. And it was just not Bengalis. In Burma, especially in places like Rangoon and Mandalay, there were a lot of Tamils, Malayalis, Maharashtrians also working there, apart from people from the eastern region. So that is why if you see Netaji Subhash Bose's INA had a lot of participation from the Tamils, Malayalis, and the Kannadigas. Even that's why he is revered today, because a large chunk had moved over there in Rangoon for working there. So now coming to our story. Before our story begins, let me give you a little perspective about our family. So I'm, by God's grace, I'm born in a family which contributed to the freedom struggle of India, and it continued to contribute to the Indo-Pakistan wars, Indo-China wars, even post-independence. All the wars, except Kargil, our family has contribution in all the wars. If I had pursued my journey in the Short Service Commission, possibly I would have landed up in Kargil, but God had some other plans for me. So, anyways, now we basically belong from my paternal side. I will more focus on my paternal side because that's where the core of the history comes from. We're based out of the historic place of Rangpur. Now, Rangpur is famous for the Rangpur rebellion, which happened or which predates the Sepoy Mutiny of 1857. So our history books doesn't teach you that also, that 1857 Sepoy Mutiny was not the only mutiny. There were at least 12 mutinies which happened in only Eastern India prior to Sepoy Mutiny. And even after Sepoy Mutiny in 1859, there was the Indigo Rebellion also, which was a big one, very big one. And indigo plantation had actually ripped, Bengal of all its resources, natural as well as the financial as well. So now coming back to Rangpur, my great grandfather, with whom this story starts, late Satish Chandra Ray, was a barrister, a businessman, and avid public speaker. And we had this house, our house in Rangpur, even today survives by the name of Bakali House. That's what my father had told me before he left us last year. So Bakali House, if somebody goes to Rangpur today, can still find. That's our house actually. The Rangpur Roy Villa. It was actually known as Rangpur Roy Villa. Sorry. And he was one of the first chairmen of the Rangpur Carmichael College and the mayor of Rangpur also. So he was directly associated in financing provincial campaigns, elections, and INA also for Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose from Rangpur in the Rangpur sector as well as in the Rangoon sector. So a lot of stories around Netaji Subhash Bose still resides with us in the family archives, which you will not find in any of the history books or any of the books that is written about Subhash Bose anywhere in the world. So, and that is when, because of his association from 1929 to 1936, Subhash Bose was constantly visiting our home. He used to stay with us. Subhash Bose, Sarojini Naidu, the great novelist, Bengal novelist, Sarat Chandra Chattopadhyay or Sarat Chandra Chatterjee, the famous singer Hemant Mukherjee, They all used to come and stay at our place. So we have those photographs and all that. And then there was my grand uncle, means his son, his second born, my great grandfather's second born. He was picked up by the Gadar party because Gadar party in around 1930s, early 1930s was picking up bright Indian students and sending them to various countries of Europe so that once the country is liberated, they can come back and use that modern technology to build the country, build the infra for the country, to be more specific. So he was picked up, his papers were burnt, police had raided our home in Calcutta, or his home in Calcutta, and he was shipped off to Dresden University. Now, when Subhash Bose was there in Germany after he recovered from tuberculosis with his treatment in Vienna, was touring entire Germany to make the Indian Legion. And that is when my granduncle, as the president of the Students Association of Dresden University, came in contact. So we have such photographs in our archives also where they are having dinner together and all that. So the purpose of giving this background, is to make you people understand that even with so much of contribution, so much of political connect, so much of leverage with in many stratas of the society, the partition was so lethal that even we were not spared. My grandparents were not spared. So the partition happened. So two things mainly which came to my knowledge from my parents and from my grandparents is first that when the partition happened, the wealthy or the influential people who were there, they had exchanged properties. And people who were middle class and lower middle class, they had actually migrated to the refugee camps. So for us, since we were in a better position, we had left everything over there. But since we had the opportunity or the leverage, our property was exchanged with the Nawab of Alipurduar. So my father's side, they all migrated from Rangpur Royvilla and came to in Kuch Bihar in the house of the Nawab of Alipurduar. This is one thing. The second thing, which was more deadly, is one of my father's Mausaji, because they used to all stay together in those days, the big joint family approach. So when he was not coming together, he came separately. So he tried to come by air. So he was beheaded at the Dhaka airport in front of his family. So when they were almost boarding the aircraft, that's when the jihadis or the radical people attacked them. And when the first blow of the sword, you know, the wife, it's a Mausiji, the wife took it on her hands over here. And it was so lethal that she fell to the ground and was almost unconscious. And the children were there. The children were there still, they were standing. And they saw their father getting beheaded in front of them with one blow. So then comes the second stage, the stage which probably Indian history doesn't capture, is these people who are robbed of their entire wealth. How did they survive over here? People who are in the refugee camps were allotted spaces and land portions in various corners of Bengal. Some migrated to other states also, as I told you, uh, obviously with the government's intervention. And for people like us from the paternal side, we came to Calcutta then, where, and the most important thing, my great grandfather couldn't survive the shock of this partition because leaving everything over there with all his memory and with all his achievements, whatever he did for as a mayor, as a Carmichael chairman of Carmichael College with Netaji Bose and everything, nothing, that was a shock of the life. So he did not survive long. Within a year of the migration, he passed away due to his failing health. Then we moved to Calcutta, and my grandfather then started doing business. We were there in a portion of South Calcutta, which is today known as Hazra. So they were on a rented accommodation. My father and his other brothers and sister, they all started studying to the government school. And fortunately, my grandfather's business took off, and in a very short span of time, by 1961, 62, they were in a very good position, uh, becoming possibly one of the richest in Calcutta. But then again, tragedy struck, and the business suffered losses. And my grandfather also passed away at the age of 64, uh, you know, due to the business losses, totally bankrupt. So my father had a very tough time, father and brothers. They survived on a single meal. So basically, what I'm trying to say over here is the partition is one thing, then the other is the post-partition effects, where you see it takes at least three generations to stabilize. The first generation is horribly impacted. He does something little, then the second generation further improves a bit, and then it comes to the third generation to be comfortably placed, I would say, in all respect, for the other family member with along with all other family members. From my mother's side, the maternal side, my grandfather was a doctor with the Britishers, working in the tea gardens of Assam, in Daflading, Aflong, places like this, Dibrugarh, on the tea estate. So, he got a land mass in one of the American airstrips, which was developed by the American forces, Air Force, US Air Force, as a vital link to their bombing operations to Burma. So the B-17 and B-52 bombers used to fly from there. So the roads even today, which is pure concrete, survives even today. It is so well built. So he got a land in such a place. The place is known as Ashok Nagar. It is now in use for the last few years because the government of India and the oil ministry has developed large reserves of oil over there, petroleum and oil. So they got a land over there. He built a house. His family was there. My mother, although, was residing with my grandfather in Assam. And but then the stories that I heard from my mother in the refugee camps and from my Mausis is, they used to get milk this much. Let's say a kid whose hands are very small will get milk up to his, wrist, and the rest will be water. So that was the condition in the refugee camps. Fortunately for them, they did not have to stay in the refugee camps for that long. And my grandfather was managed to take out a land, and they moved to that place and built the house. So it was, little easy from that perspective. But yes, my grandmother, maternal grandmother, she was the pillar who managed the five children with them, because my mother was there with my grandfather. Five children with a very small amount of money, making them study, managing the household, and everything. So, and all the colonies that came up that time were all refugees, who had come from East Bengal. So it even stands today. Those houses, those histories, those oral, piece, they all start today. Interestingly, today in Calcutta, just like Delhi, in Delhi, I stay in Delhi. In Delhi, there are multiple colonies which came up for the refugees who came from Karachi, Lahore, Rawalpindi, Quetta, all these places. So, for example, Lajpat Nagar, the famous Lajpat Nagar of Delhi, it was for all the people who had come from Lahore. Lahorians. So similarly, I mean, basically picking all the sources, they allocated the spaces, and that's how each of the colonies came up. So similarly, in Calcutta, there is a place called Bijoy Gaur. There is a place called Netaji Nagar. These are all, or Ganguli Bagan or Baghajati. These are all refugee colonies. Now they're all very posh areas, the best doing. But how? It took 3 generations to come to that stage. So, yeah, so this is my story, and 3 things which come out from this is the enormous hardships that the 3 generations faced to stabilize, the massacre the families went through, and there are other stories also of the partition. A similar stuff happened in the 1971 war as well. And but I will not go to that aspect because our talk doesn't cover 1971 today. But similar instances happened in 1971 also. So,
Surya ji,
uh,
I'm going to ask you to pause here, and I want Neela to come in on her side
sure.
of the story for the 47, because we will build into even, what happened with Bangladesh, the formation of Bangladesh in 71. But so Neela, over to you. And so
Thank you.
thank you, Surya. It's very, very poignant hearing you say these names, Kuch Bihar, and I mean, I just feel like I'm taken into, I'm transported into like a sepia toned you know movie, and the horror of it is it's not a movie, it's true everything that you're
Mm,
describing.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yes, Neela, what's your story that you bring here today?
All right. So yes, it was amazing, Surya, to listen to your story. It's a very different story, but very powerful. So my story, it's funny that it's only in writing things that the stories take this concrete shape. I grew up listening to these stories from my mother, but it was in 1997, India's 50th, independence, when we were celebrating in my college in New York, in Long Island, and I was asked to participate in it. So it is in that moment when I tried to articulate this story. So I ended up writing something I call Border in the Courtyard, Partition India and My Mother's Home, which ended up later published 2002 in my college magazine, and I ended up getting a prize for it. That was the beginning of my writing. The very first thing I published, the very first thing I got recognized for. But at that time, I called my mother, because it's my mother's story mainly, even though my father's family came from the same area, which is now Bangladesh, Sylhet. But it's my mother who had to. My father's family came earlier, even though my father went to college in Hobiganj in Sylhet, but he never associated it with home. My mother did, because they had to leave that area and actually move to Assam, as Surya was saying, many different places. So when I called her and asked her to say something about it, it was so poignant. And that was after so many years. I was in the United States already. She was in Tripura, in my father's where my father's family lived. So what I remember so poignantly, I just asked her to write something. I think it wasn't even a phone. I think she sent me a letter. So in exquisite Bengali, she was describing the moment in terms of a broken dream. So she said that during the rainy season, the entire town of Shunamganj would become an island, as the Shurma River would engulf the land, and they would sing songs together, Monosha songs. It was a festival time that they were having. And then suddenly the news came. And the news was that, yes, there is this imminent partition. So, and then what she said, that how Sir Radcliffe was given 30 minutes of briefing in front of map of India to partition it. And when he came, this is the thing, right? Somebody somewhere else looks at the map of India, and this is what I said, the border in the courtyard. Okay, this is this thing. And within 4 weeks, this thing has happened. So this is actually probably when we start to talk about the intensity of it and the bewilderment. Even though there were people, who were sensing this kind of stuff, and then my grandmother, who was an extraordinary woman, I actually have written not only that article that was published, a blog And that blog, I mean, actually, I would like to share that with people if they want to look at it. Understanding of what is really home and what is really a mapping of the home, and how that experience changed everything. It changed everything for me. It changed everything for my mother. So what happened with my grandmother, she sensed that something terrible is going to happen. And my grandmother was 29 years old, widow. When she became a widow, she was only 29 years old. And my grandfather, Satish Chandra Chaudhary, I was listening to the name, Surya's great grandfather, also Satish Chandra Chaudhary, who had died when my mother was only 9 years old. It was my grandmother who was actually raising 6 of her children. It was very difficult. They had a lot of land. There was jamindars there, but they didn't have any money. So my grandmother actually realized that she had to send her daughters very quickly. So she figured things out. My maternal uncle, who was still very young at that time, but he had started a press. So they started to send the children away. A few months before this happened. So, in some ways, they actually avoided the serious violence. But that area did not face that kind of violence for some strange reason. But my mother's family then moved to Assam, and of course, they were destitute. They had to take shelter with a relative. My mother at that time was actually going to college. They called them IA at that time, and she had to, she just started, I think, with the BA education, and everything had to stop. So she moved to Assam, and then she took a job at an elementary school. So she was teaching there. But the stories that so when she got married, my parents got married very late. Literally, my earliest memories are my mother telling the stories of this land. And it's like a dream. The reason that I'm talking about that blog, in that blog, I call it's a river called Shurma, a place named Shunamganj, mapping the consciousness of a land, dreaming of my mother's village in Sylhet. So what my mom did at that time, she drew a map of her entire house, beautifully cartographed with every little detail on that map. So this thing, right, borders and maps and the way that external histories tell it and how the internal experiences of people feel that. So for me, so what is home then? So she left that home. So there's this experience of border crossing for me to go beyond the borders. And now, no, strangely, there was no connection with anything in some ways and almost with everything. But what happened there is that in that little village, in that little village, there is this idyllic place. Of course, it's a memory, right? It's a memory and the stories. My mother and her younger siblings, as well as her older sister, playing there. This festivals. My mother was also the first girl who used to go to a school. She learned how to ride a bike there, but she would talk about the river, the boat songs in the river. She will talk about um, different kinds of relatives, all kinds of things, and the pain that she could see in her father's face. She was extremely sensitive. All of these stories she would talk about. Now I write that I can almost taste like 49 different kinds of mangoes in that orchard. Can you imagine? So there was this orchard, this fish, and in that map, the entire area, and which had all these different places for different places. But the most important thing from that story, because the partition is such a traumatic experience in some ways, but the friendship between my grandfather and a famous poet of Bangladesh, now Bangladesh, Hachon Raja, a Muslim, next door Jamindar was a Muslim man. They were great friends. They would walk together every morning. My mother tells me the story that how my grandfather's first son was born, who did not live for too long, died in childhood, that he came to give a golden mohar, the Muslim friend of his. This Muslim friend actually helped my grandfather. Actually, the loans that he gave, he completely, forgave him all that. And on my grandfather's chitta, a Muslim milkman who used to provide milk to our home, to my mother's home. See, I say our home, even though I have never been there. This is the strange thing. I have traveled all over the world and not yet to that place, even though I keep dreaming of going there someday. So whatever milk was left in his, after he sold everything, he would pour that into my grandfather's chitta, the place where my grandfather was cremated. So there is this personal connection with people that I have never known, never seen, but I feel that as if I know them, as if I have a feeling with the river Surma. And why is this river? Because the stories, the songs, and the river will swell, because this is at the winter time, the river will swell and there will be huge howers. They call them howers. They'll fill it up. And my mother would tell stories about how like huge turtles will show up and they will have to, amazing, as I said, it's almost feels like some never land for me. Now, why this partition became so poignant, I would talk to my mother and say, Ma, would you go there? And she would say no. I did not realize, I thought she would really want to go and see that place. But there was something so deep about that place in her psyche, in her understanding of who she was, that as if that land is almost like literally just a map of consciousness, as if there is this, that going there will probably be too painful. Now, I will just end with one story. After I finished writing this blog, it's just a blog, right, on the internet, anybody can see it. And I finished because I was looking for the map. I was trying to find that little village, Mallikpur, because the internet I could find, and I couldn't find that Mallikpur village. I could find Shunamganj, all kinds of pictures that I put there. Many years ago, suddenly I got an email from somebody from England. I don't even know who that was. Right now, I'm forgetting his name. He said, I found that little village. I said, what? He said, you did not put this thing on the internet, but I found your village, Mallikpur. This is the power of this strange storytelling and connection. Now, this person said his wife is from Bangladesh. He did not specify whether he's an Englishman or not, right? He may or may not be. But somehow he read my blog and then make the effort to find that village, because I end that blog saying, which I just shared in the chat, that that there is this pain in me, that I couldn't find it even in a map thing. And he said, and then I did find it. So see, this is where this strange story of displacement, trauma, loss of land. Of course, they had a lot of land. They did not get any money at all. There was no exchange whatsoever. My uncle actually were very poor, had to work extremely hard to establish. My mother, she was a teacher. And then, of course, later she married late and ended up in UP with my father. And then when she came here, in her life, she captured this entire, the history. She lived close to, 99, just 9 days before her 99th birthday, she died. But her entire story captured the memory of ordinary people and the widening of our consciousness through this strange, traumatic, and still, I don't know. I still don't know how to put this into any kind of context, except that this is a expansion of consciousness. I connect with people that I never knew, who died a long time ago. I connect even with this man who sent me this email. I suddenly connected with somebody in England, or suppose those who oppressed us. And I do not want to diminish the intensity of the trauma, but something strange happened. Because see, the other day when we were listening to Alok Pandeyji, and he was talking about a paradox of history, right? So paradox of history creates these strange things, right? The reason I'm sitting here, the reason I'm even talking about it, is part of this diasporic experience, is part of expansion of consciousness. So if there is any healing in recognizing that there is such a broader picture, but we need to go back to the stories. It is only in understanding the story that I understood the longings in me. I understood why I want to speak, why I want to connect with the stories of my mother's family, my grandmother, the connection with the great mother, the tantric stuff. Everything that I do and I have done somehow is rooted in that land that I have never seen. Thank you.
Wow, Neela. Oof, as I have heard both of you, this feeling is, how will we know where we are going if we don't know where we came from? Right? And that longing for the roots, that longing for the point of origin of our being and that ancestry, if we don't know where that came from, we're like pieces of pork bobbing on the ocean, right? So
Right.
they also say, that generational pain that is not transformed is transferred, and you just keep carrying it forward generation after generation, even though Surya talks about, 3 generations, but there's also the risk of that third generation having no clue of what began that journey. So in that context, my question to you is, as you grew up with these family memories, how did they shape your understanding of home, belonging, identity, and most importantly, your life choices? So how do you now hold this legacy? Who have you become as a holder of this story of partition of that was experienced firsthand by your own families? Who have you become? How have these stories shaped you? So maybe Surya can begin. You're muted.
Yeah, so sorry. So I'll keep it very short and simple. To be very candid, as you rightly said, I grew up with listening to these horrible stories of genocide and massacres around us, not just with our families, but there were other stories also for the other families. And one thing which happened, I missed out to mention. I don't know about the other parts of India or in Delhi for that matter also, but in Calcutta, there always used to be a yearly convention of all those displaced families coming together and celebrating, talking about it, discussing about it, printing or publishing journals about those experiences, and then, having a feast also. I had attended a couple of them during my childhood days when I was growing up along with my father. So they used to call it Sammilani. Sammilani means a conference, coming together of all those displaced people. So, and it used to happen based on the areas. Like we came from Rangpur. So there used to be a Rangpur Sammilani in Calcutta. And then people who came from Dhaka, Dhaka Sammilani. People who came from Jessore, Jessore Sammilani, like that. So those, public meetings or conferences, which used to happen like this, actually constantly reminded us to not forget what we are and where we came from. Number one. Number two, what my as a historian, I always have believed from my childhood that history teaches us a lesson, and we should always keep an eye on that lesson and always see that what's happening around us today and try to implement the better ideas from our history lessons in today's life. So I always did that, consciously or even unconsciously. So what happened to me was I became extremely rooted in my religion. because partition of India was based on religion. Let's not run away from that fact. Let's not run away from that fact. It was based on only and only religion, nothing else. So I became very rooted in my religion. But at the same time, since communism had entered into Bengal in a very big way, I saw people falling apart and forgetting where they came from. And that is exactly why Bengal continues to suffer as well today. The the emotional heritage is lost to a great extent. Very few people like us who carry those memories actually have the audacity to speak about it. That is point number two. Point number three, I always used to think this is why, I mentioned the three, uh, the generations that it took to become stable. That's more from a financial and economical perspective because they were all robbed off of all their resources. So emotional uh, instability inside remains. It remained throughout with my grandparents. It remained with my parents also. They are even my father till his last day always used to focus on savings, having a very economical lifestyle, and always used to scold me whenever I used to, go off track. Because that trauma actually used to work in their mind that what if something happens again today like this? They never got rid of that trauma. They never got rid actually. So obviously that gave us a good perspective of why savings is important. Building your base is important. So for me, I would say to keep things simple, that it made me rooted in my religion and made my foundation strong so that I work constantly on making the basics of life stand tall so that my next generation, my son, doesn't have to go through it. So it is like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Surya, for kind of opening the inner journey up for our listeners and for being witnessed and acknowledged, because that's what truth and reconciliation is, that someone bears witness to your story and doesn't contradict it or gaslight it, right? Neela, how have you been shaped by your history?
Right. Well, as I started to say earlier, I think I'm completely shaped by that experience. In some ways, the fact that I am sort of a scholar of world religions probably is rooted in that experience. In a different way, because I ended up discovering all these things completely, you know, without planning, without knowing. One thing that the fact that what is really home, right? So the fact that I feel at home no matter where I am, this is also the strange thing, and I write about that in detail in my article. So understanding of what is really border of ourself. Who am I? My identity became so. In some ways, the dissolution of the identity, part of the sadhana thing that I ended up somehow ended up participating without knowing about it, was all connected with that. So the word border in Bengali is shimana. Shimana also means limits, the limits of our being, the limits of our human conditioning, and how to, in some ways, go beyond this kind of center and periphery thing. That how, yes, it creates these borders, it creates these limits, because this is how you define your identity, your very, very temporal identity and temporary identity, right? So there is this kind of strange negotiation probably has gone inside my unconscious mind. My father's world, because it was, I used to go to Tripura, where and again, we would go there every 3 years because we were living in UP. We didn't have, we couldn't We didn't have money, only 3-4 years that it'll take 3-4 days to go to my paternal. And then everybody would speak Sylheti. So let me just say a little bit about this connection with the language. My parents spoke Sylheti at home, but did not speak to us in Sylheti. They wanted us to speak, the quote unquote proper Bengali. But now on the streets of New York, I hear Sylheti. Streets of, Cyprus, I heard Sylheti. I write in my blog also that, and again, I became very aware of these borders. That was in Cyprus. Again, my friend, Lazaro, who talks about her experiences there, another divided country. And when I was there, strange, I walk into the street and hear the sound of Bhatiali songs in Cyprus. And I see these people from Bangladesh who were yelling at me, how come you are in Cyprus and you have not been to Sylhet? It was like some sort of deep, deep connection with the people and with the language. Even though I barely can speak and I hear it, every time I hear the sound of Sylheti, no matter where you are, it's like this, you have this sense of something deeply familiar and yet something far away. So this, I think, fundamentally my understanding of world religions, and when I wrote my first book, In the Beginning is Desire, and there is a section on Islam, and when I go and actually understand, say Ibn al-Arabi, global understanding of it, and now of course my expansion of understanding of Christianity, esoteric stuff and all that, I think they are rooted in that experience. What is really religion? Why does religion divide people? Why do we have, even though at the deepest layer, there's this extraordinary liberatory, articulation, perhaps because of that experience, that I am what I am, even as a scholar or, writer, or whichever way people see me. Thank you.
Just
Wow.
one point, when Neelaji mentioned the songs of the Bhatiali music, I certainly remembered that S.D. Burman, father of Rahul Dev Burman, he
Right.
brought in the Bhatiali music so effectively in
Yes.
our film industry in Bombay,
Right.
and that
Right.
is lost today. Bhatiali music is lost, but it is one piece of, intangible heritage that Bharat should preserve actually.
Well, it is preserved in some sections in Bengal, the songs,
Yeah, yes, I
some of
remember.
these things. But yes, I
Yeah,
mean, they were from Tripura. So I heard about, because these, again, yeah,
correct,
this
correct,
diverse, powerful music that has, you're
correct.
absolutely right. Yes.
It was fascinating. It was
Yeah.
fascinating. The Bhatiali music. It shaped the Indian music industry after
Right.
partition to a great extent.
Huh.
And in Bengal also, Bengali
Right.
film industry as well.
Right. Right.
You
Right.
went on mute suddenly.
I am still there. Can you not hear
Yeah.
me?
Let me go to Neela with the question now.
I can
So,
hear him.
you
I
both
could hear
talked
him.
about inheriting trauma and strength, interestingly, that it's never just one side of the coin. Um, can you talk about, how, looking at your own family, what do you feel has been passed down across generations? Not only the wounds, but also the strengths. Can you look at your own lives today and perhaps summarize what wounds were passed on, but who did you become? What was the resilience that may have come out of this? I'm trying to move this story towards one of healing, not just of trauma. Neela?
Okay. Yes. So I personally do not feel the wound anymore. Even in the storytelling, in my mother's extraordinarily powerful personality, and when she came to live with us in the United States after my father passed away, I saw what kind of incredible history, incredible strength that she literally embodies the experience and the reality of it all. So again, what Surya was saying before about this generational thing, right? What my mother experienced and what I experienced, I never experienced any of that except in stories. Except, and of course, because I was growing up in UP, right? And my father's family lived in Tripura, even though came from the same thing. And Fortunately, they did not face physical violence, economic destitution, yes, and that sense of displacement, right? The sense of something idyllic, something, a loss that could never be, even though my uncle later went and found, but there's nothing. It's just a story. It's just that story that I do not know what it will be like if I go to that Sylhet someday. I hope to. But as far as I'm concerned, and now my children have been born in the United States, they know the stories, but they have a completely different life. It's like generations have changed the whole thing. Okay, my mother talks about this. I have no idea how my sons would, relate to it. They hardly relate to India because they live in the United States. It's a story. It's part of this change. Change is part of life, right? But I think, I personally, when I think that is vital for the subcontinent to tell the story, to tell it as it is, and then let it dissolve so that we understand we have a civilizational connection with each other. When I talk to people in Pakistan, friends in Pakistan, in the United States, it's easy. We're meeting all these people without those borders in some ways. That it is possible to connect through culture, through language, and even though whatever religious differences there may or may not be, it's vital to connect with the civilizational concept. Like Surya talked about Burma, and because I grew up reading, Sharat Chandra, Sharat Chandra's novels, so much about it. So there is this entire understanding of a civilization which was beyond the borders of today's nation states. Nation states have created this extremely complex understanding of identity. And people in India, including at that time, like Tagore, were violently, not violently, but yes, extremely strongly against the understanding of a nation, which is a very narrow understanding of a nation. But you had no choice, right? Modernity was literally thrust upon the country, and we had to construct this identity. But yes, at this point, I think collectively and individually, we need to have a civilizational understanding of the subcontinent in order to truly heal and connect with each other in deeper ways.
Thank you so much, Neela, because in a way you've answered the question that I would have closed with for both of you, which is, what does truth and reconciliation involve with your lived experience with the partition of Bengal specifically? And what you're saying is we have to acknowledge it because there is no reconciliation without justice and truth and acknowledgement of what happened, right? There can be no forgiveness and moving on without acknowledging the truth of what happened. So you're saying acknowledge it all so that it can be dissolved, so it can be put down, and then everyone can move on. And what you're saying is claim instead, put down the story of horror, release that, bless and release that, and claim the greater story of a civilization that is still alive and that is waiting to be recovered and celebrated and is much deeper, stronger ground for your identity.
Right.
And it's a healing identity rather than a fractured identity, right? So that's how I would summarize what I just heard you say. Very, very powerful, showing a way out. And when you hear it from someone whose family has gone through it and who's kind of showing a way out, then it's not someone else telling you who has not suffered. You're speaking from the inside of the story. That's very, very powerful. Surya, the same way, how do you think this generation and future generations can hold their history in a way that honors the truth, but also reconciles with it?
The one thing that I had made for my child, for my son, is to make him aware of the history. That's very important. He should be aware of who he is, what his forefathers have endured, and how things have shaped up for him. Things are much easier for them in today's generation, but it was not for us as well. Even we had to fight for our uh, stuff, anything for that matter. So, as you rightly said, Ninimaji, is acknowledging the wounds, is the first step to healing. And for me, it happened. I learned initially there was a shock. I grew up with those shocks, and because whenever there used to be a family function and my elders, father's generation or the earlier generation used to come together, 50% of the discussion would be centered around partition and how people settled. So I used to hear all those stories till at least I would say the age of 2021. So it prolonged for people who stayed in Bengal, it prolonged. And then when I came to Delhi, I saw the Punjabis, some of the Punjabis still struggling economically, financially, and some are very good. So I would say for me it is a different case because Bengal is still religiously very sensitive even today, and that's why a grounding actually helps us to stay aware of and monitor the situation constantly. And that's what I have passed on to my children also, that at least be aware, at least be proactive in seeking things, but at the same time be pragmatic and devise a way which suits your objective and cause in your life. So, because that horror of partition today, if I consider Bengal and I consider Delhi, it stays. It stays even today because every colony that came up, which I mentioned, still reminds us of those days. And I, being a student of history or a researcher, I'm constantly working and passing on through this set of information. So I can't forget. I'm not now in shock. I have acknowledged, but I despise for the heritage that we have lost due to partition. The people obviously is lost, and especially it comes from the fact that the undivided Bengal had brilliant temple architecture, one of its kind in the whole world, the terracotta temples. And much of that inventory is lost today because of the partition. It falls on the other side of the border. So, and I went and, there are videos which comes up and I keep seeing that those houses of the zamindari houses, which are lying now desolate in the forests, in some other secluded area, beautiful palatial houses. And when you look at those videos, you will only feel that what kind of opulence that existed in those houses and the people around, and what it has become. It remains as a reminder to the glorious days which we feel and realize with an ease, with a pinch of salt, and that's all we can do. But for our children, they are made aware, and but they move on. But me, the third generation, is doing that balancing act. And when I do that balancing act, somewhere there is a bit of pain, somewhere there is a bit of pain for the heritage lost, for the people lost, looking at the hardships that my father and even to some extent I have endured in my early days. So, yeah, so that's how it goes. That's how it goes.
Wow, as I'm listening to you both, actually, it's poignant how here are two people, and according to their swabhav, their swadharm, they have responded similarly and differently. And they've come out to whatever is a place that is the best they can be and making the best of what they inherited. And two quite different stories from what I can see, the way Neela talks about goddess in world religions and discussing with, interfaith, and that's where her life has taken her. And Surya's life has taken him to telling his son, remember who you are and find your resilience in that, and don't lose that identity, because we've already lost so much, right? So these are equally valid and important ways to hold identity and reconcile or resolve history of trauma. So I'm holding them both with a lot of respect and compassion and honor of your ancestors. I can't begin imagining, today on Zoom, we can sit and tell these stories from the comfort of our homes, but in 3 generations, if we go back just 3 generations, the horror that our families have endured. So can we just hold that? And I know we are open for questions now. If anyone wishes to add something or bring in a perspective or have a question of either Neela or Surya, this is the time to put it in the chat box. You've been listening very patiently. Thanks, Caroline. She's saying thank you both for sharing your stories. I just met Caroline in Japan, and her story with her father from Ireland, and all those stories as well. Everywhere you look, 3 generations back, I think we each carry stories of a time that was not kind on this planet. Sometimes it's just 1 generation. You don't even have to go 3 generations. It's just the generation before you. Is there something then that either of you would like to leave us with, Neela and Surya? Because then I have something to sum up for ourselves.
I think for me, as a historian, as a heritage person, and a researcher, I think what the government should do is to build a museum, at least a museum, reminding the stories of partition with photographs, articles, videos, and documentaries which are available even today, so that it reminds us and our next generations of what happened with us or their forefathers went through, just like something like, let's say, what our forefathers might have endured 1,000 years back when Mahmud of Ghazni or Ghori used to invade us. Those stories of resilience, valor, resistance are not lost. Those were still documented. So similar way, this is important, and we can draw a parallel example from the Jews. Everywhere they have built, museums reminding the horrors of the concentration camps. If the Jews can do it, why can't we? Possibly we are even more persecuted than the Jews. The Jews were haunted during the Second World War, but we have been haunted for the last 800 years. So, yeah.
Thank you. Neela?
So yeah, it's a difficult, very difficult, but very human story. All over the world, some kind of violence about identities have taken place over and over again. Now, since I wanted to mention one thing, when I was mentioning that letter my mother wrote when I was writing this whole thing, I had a woman with me, a companion from Bangladesh. Because she speaks Bangla, so I read that letter to her. And this is what, and I mentioned that in my writing. So, when I read it to her, so this is the thing, she's a Muslim woman, Bangladeshi here in the United States. She describes the Surma River of my mother's stories, filled with headless bloated bodies. I knew about that terrible war. And again, Surya had mentioned to the 1971, how borders are drawn over and over again and bloodied as this kind of strange things were created. And she told stories that she knew that somebody's kitchen was in another country and they were running back and forth. And she also talked about how during that horrific war, two of her own brothers and their Hindu servant were confronted by Pakistani soldiers and how they helped. Against their better judgment, they could have been killed by Pakistani soldiers. Now look at this history repeating itself in some strange ways. And it was a partition of Pakistan, right? In some ways, another country was created in the name of, again, in the name, but it's like, so what is wrong with us? We keep repeating. So I think one vital important thing that we learn from history, from our stories, in order to become aware, how do we reduce that violence within ourselves? How do we construct our understanding of who we are without constantly repeating this kind of bordering and bloodying our neighborhoods, our friends, next door friends? So this is what my whole work is about how to liberate our consciousness from those unconscious forces and the historical contingencies that seem to construct our humanity, constrict us in our humanity.
Neela, you are speaking to the origin of this Truth and Reconciliation movement that I initiated 7 years ago in 2020 with the George Floyd killings, because I felt very deeply that, if America doesn't heal its wound of slavery, it will keep coming back in some form or shape. And then I realized cultures all around the world carry their own wounds. And until we address them and heal them, until we heal our collective trauma, we'll keep recycling them in some other form or shape, right?
Right.
Yeah, so, we're all doing our work in our own ways, and, maybe hopefully all these things will lead to some sort of tipping point. I'm looking at some thoughts here. Caroline's asking, I'm wondering what the speakers think about the role of silence and suppression of story in these cases.
Yes, I wanted to, I think Surya has already responded, I think. I have heard people talk about that, how they actually did not speak of these things in their homes. We spoke very, Surya's family talked about it, my family talked about it. But I actually wrote one of my earliest reviews of a book, from of the Punjab story. And I wrote a review of a book, and I did some research about that at that time. And a lot of people said that the shame was so much. Again, I think my family was very fortunate that they didn't have to face, but some of them, the silence, and probably that was more corrosive. It's vital that we face the trauma. Not easy, but it's vital that we acknowledge what happened. We acknowledge that these family things. Otherwise, it's like this, generations and generations keep repeating the thing. Vital to, and don't forget, this kind of violence, the external thing gets internalized and then starts playing itself within families itself.
Yes. Yes. Oh, wow. So I'm getting goosebumps, which is a sign that perhaps some cathartic somatic thing has taken place. And this is a sign for me when I enter these calls, and each one is so rich and deep. And somehow at the end of it, the heart expands, there is goosebumps, and there are goosebumps, and it rains outside, which are unexpected rains, or I would like to believe that this work, even if it's a Zoom room, the bringing up of these memories, the reconciling of them in some form, helping move the energy forward in some way, things that have been stuck for so long. And I think our bodies, our minds will express that reconciliation to us in some way. So whether it's dreams you're going to have tonight, or symbols along the way, just keep your eyes and ears open for signs of some healing or reconciliation that has taken place, because This is how the work happens. This is how truth and reconciliation happens when stories are told and received and witnessed without judgment, and allowed to be released, if they wish to be released. So I would like to just close us out that today we've been reminded that history does not live only in archives. It lives in the stories families choose to tell. And sometimes in the stories, they struggle to tell. So thank you, Neela and Surya, for transforming inherited pain into shared understanding. May conversations like this help us remember that every story heard with compassion becomes a step toward reconciliation.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity to talk about this.
These
Thank you.
recordings will be shared, and feel free to
Same
share
here.
them with others, generate more conversations. I'm sure there are people on this call who would have liked to tell their story. So create spaces for people to be able to share their story so we can move on from that, right? So
Thank you.
as you
Same here.
said,
I think, thank you, Didi, for organizing this, because this is the first time I spoke in so much of detail about the partition experiences, the trauma, the legacy, the heritage in a public domain. First time. Of course, I did speak about the revolutionary period, the freedom struggle connections, couple of times, but not this one. This is the first time I am speaking about it. And possibly I am the only person left in my family today, in my generation, who has these stories in greater details because of my father, because my father used to discuss a lot. I used to pick up and later on used to go through. And being a researcher, obviously, I used to read a little more and dig into more, so which gave me a perspective. But yes, those massacres, those genocides that happened with our family, that left a deep, deep impact, very deep impact,
Of course.
very
So
deep
to the
impact.
point that when I called you for this session, you were a little hesitant, and then you said, Didi, I don't have more than 20 minutes to share. And having heard you today, you began your first answer with 20 minutes, and we had many more questions to still work with.
Right,
So,
right,
so
right.
clearly there is a lot that is still waiting to be, and may this have opened that space for many more people and for you to take it through to its real healing and releasing. So we can move forward from a cleaner place. So on that, thank you so
Thank you
much,
very
Neela.
much.
Thank you so much, Surya. And thank you so much
Thank
to
you.
our beautiful audience.
Thank you
Yes,
to
thank
all
you
of
to
you.
everyone who has taken time out to join
Right.
this webinar and hear to our stories.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Deep, deep gratitude. Thank you.
Yes, deepest gratitude, definitely. Thank you.